The Constitutional Court is hearing the suspended public protector's bid to return to office with immediate effect. In her papers, Busisiwe Mkhwebane argues that the final year of her 7-year term began last month, and returning to office would ensure a smooth handover to her successor. Earlier, the Western Cape High Court ruled that her suspension by the president was invalid and set it aside, pending confirmation by the Constitutional Court. The Democratic Alliance and President Cyril Ramaphosa appealed the High Court decision. Let's speak to Professor Frans Viljoen. He's the director of the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. For more on this, Prof, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. It has been well argued that we find ourselves here because of the initial process, especially in terms of interviewing candidates for this particular position, with the DA's Glenys Breitenbach at the time in 2016, noting that there was undue haste in trying to appoint a public protector. Is there something to be said about that?
Yes, I think, it's, hindsight is 20/20 vision, but even at the time, a number of people raised apprehensions. And at the time, I think one wanted to give the benefit of the doubt to the incumbent, the new public protector. But it was certainly raised that it was a curious career trajectory that she had as set out in her CV. It is true that she spent some years with the Public Protector's Office. Then she went and had a stint with Home Affairs at a senior level, a deputy director. She went and served in an embassy in China for a period of time as a counselor, came back to South Africa, served at the highest level, at the director level in the Home Affairs Department again. And then a few months, literally before the interviews were held, one sees in the CV then that she moves to the State Security Agency, and she takes on a position as an analyst. Now, clearly that sounds curious at the very least. When questions were put about this career shift, she was quite vague, Public Protector Mkhwebane. She said something around, protecting and upholding the values in the Constitution, and that is important work that she was doing. So that kind of alerted some to ask the question, how does this career trajectory fit into the best possible? And if one now wants to jump forward and say, if one looks at the Section 194 Parliamentary Committee inquiry, and you look on the 18th of July 2022, we have someone who used to work with the Public Protector's Office, Advocate Kekana, who then testifies that, as we will remember about the Bancorp APSA report, that's the report where the Public Protector recommended that the central bank be nationalized and that the Constitution be amended to that effect, and that was very controversial and thought to be outside her remit. Now Kekana, explains that there were 2 meetings held between the Public Protector and the State Security Agency. And who was present, among others, the then head of the SSA, Arthur Fraser. And during these meetings, there were discussions, and he was told basically to include this phrase, this specific item in the report, which was not in the report before the meetings with the State Security Agency. He thought that it was not important, and a second meeting was held where literally the SSA staff members gave him a piece of paper with a text that had to be finding its way into the Public Protector's report. And that is exactly what happened. So in a sense, one doesn't want to jump to conclusions, but clearly one can see lines drawn here. The second issue, I think that...
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I do need to squeeze this in. So with Vision 20 to come in mind, what is it that the committee that will be sitting, interviewing candidates for the Public Protector need to consider? How do they do things differently, given that the last round of interviews, you had a candidate who was interviewed well within the early hours of the next day? Exactly.
So very briefly, I think first, the short list should be shorter. There were 14 candidates, too many. There should be a short list of a few candidates that are really qualified. Secondly, The interview process should certainly be shorter in a period of a day. It should be at least done over a number of days. It should not be compressed into this time that really people were tired and maybe lost a bit of focus. The third is, I think, the nature of the questions. The idea at the time was also to keep the candidates, in closed rooms, literally, so that they would not hear the questions being asked to others. I think people realized later on that maybe, there are smartphones and people may have access to these interviews anyway. So the idea for me would be to tailor-make the questions much more specific to the strengths and weaknesses of particular candidates. Yes, one wants to cover broadly the same terrain, but be much more responsive and specific. Then I think criteria have to be very much more clearly articulated. Fit and proper are vague terms. Now, for the deputy public protectors interviews in 2019, there were already much clearer criteria developed. So I would suggest that the shortlisting committee, the committee in Parliament responsible, should, before really even going to the shortlisting, come up with its very clear criteria that will speak, for example, to the analytical prowess of the candidate and the competence, the demonstrable competence, the clear CV-based indications that this candidate is able to speak truth to power, essentially, to be that kind of David against the all-powerful Goliath of the state or, corruption agencies and so on. So I think if these few criteria, these criteria are made more clear, at least I think we could end up at a different place, because my concluding sentence will be that what we found in the previous case is the candidate that was selected was, in a sense, the lowest common denominator. It was the candidate that no one really had much issue with. But the candidates that really stood out, that had competence to actually, be those kind of upholding truth to power, those ones, had some kind of controversy and issues, and in the end, one sees the selection of a candidate that really didn't have the stature. So I'd add that element, that didn't really have the stature on her career trajectory that qualified her for that position of so much power and so much accountability.
Professor Frans Viljoen is the director of the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria.